Hey, good morning, everyone. Happy Friday to you. Josh's Severe Weather reporting from Raleigh, North Carolina. Appreciate y'all joining me this morning. I'm going to talk about what's coming up here in the tropics. And as advertised pretty much everywhere, we are heading into what could be a very active hurricane season and a very destructive one. And typically, your most active seasons get started early, and I believe this season is going to be one of those due to the fact that we've got increasingly warm waters in the Atlantic and conditions that are going to be more favorable for tropical development before the official start begins here June 1st. Hurricane season now just 4 weeks away. I know a lot of you are starting to wrap up school and getting ready for summer vacations, and now's the time to start being prepared for what may come and disturb your vacation. And obviously, if you live near the coastline or in the Caribbean, may disrupt your lives and cause damage. So places that I'm going to be keeping an eye on here over the next few weeks are across the main development region, which typically doesn't even get going until July or early August with waves that develop into storms. But water temperatures are running very warm, pretty much equivalent to what you would expect later in July, early in August, right now in the beginning of May. And the only thing holding things back right now is favorable upper level winds and wind shear. But we're going to talk about when that's going to change. And then as we get closer to the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico, obviously waters are warm enough for a tropical system. Wind shear's been high for now, but I do expect there to be a beginning of what could be a very active beginning of the season here coming up in just a few weeks. This was my forecast from back in March. I've just updated the graphic, but the forecast has not changed. I just wanted to make it a little bit more clear to you guys. But I am predicting one of our most active seasons on record here with 30 named storms. Half of them will be hurricanes, 7 majors, and an ace of 250. And that's going to be pretty much 100% higher than the climatological average. Now, the last several years have been more active. We're in a few decades of more active activity on the Atlantic side, maybe not necessarily the Pacific side, but the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean and the Southeast Coast obviously are areas that we need to be watching, where a lot of folks live and a lot of folks can be impacted by storms. And, you know, hurricane season's less than a month away. We need to be preparing now, not waiting until July or August when that first watch or warning gets posted for the Gulf or the Southeast Coast, in my opinion. It's never too early to be prepared at this point. I cannot tell you with any skill where a storm is going to form and hit this early out. Nobody can, and if they say they can, they're definitely lying to you, in my opinion. But the conditions are certainly looking a lot more favorable than what you might expect on an average year. Last year, we did have one major hurricane quickly intensify off the Florida coast. Then it weakened as it hit the Panhandle, and we were kind of let off the hook from major storms. The reason why is that we were heading towards a strong El Nino this year. Things are completely opposite as we head back in the direction of a La Nina potentially here by the middle or latter part of the hurricane season. These are the names that we're going to see on the list, starting with Alberto, and I do think Alberto is going to form before the end of the month of May. Beryl, Chris, Debbie, and Ernesto looking possible before July 4th, potentially. At least Debbie, maybe Ernesto. Francine, Gordon, Helene, Isaac, and Joyce by early August. Kirk, Leslie, Milton, Nadine, Oscar, Patty, Raphael, Sarah, and Tony for late August and much of September. And then I think in October we get to Tony, Valerie, William, Adria, Braylon, Caridad, Deshawn. And November may still have a few storms. Emery, Foster, Gemma, I believe, Heath, sorry, and Isla, which is a Latina name. And we may go past that, but my forecast is 30. Here's a look at what's going on for the time being. You can see the tropics are not favorable at this point for development. We've got ourselves a pretty strong trough digging into the western Atlantic all the way into Cuba, and then drawing instability and showers and storms up through the central Caribbean and to the southeast Bahamas, the Turks and Caicos. It's not been a great start here to the warm season over Puerto Rico, a very wet April, same with Hispaniola. This area has just been stuck between systems, and unfortunately in the month of May, we could continue to see crushing amounts of rain over Hispaniola, Puerto Rico, the southeastern Bahamas. And where I think we're going to see things ramping up will be over the southern part of Central America and the north coast of South America. Trade winds are going to be favorable. Convergence will be favorable for lots of rain and thunderstorms. Right now, very dry air aloft, dropping down through Florida, but as things heat up and turn more humid, as we preheat for what's going to be real summer in Florida pretty soon, we will have some coastal convergence and potentially some showers and storms that pop up. But still not a bad time of year to visit Florida. I was actually down there a couple weeks ago. It was 90, but the humidity was low, so it didn't feel awful. But compared to the winter, I'm sure you guys down there will take it. Now, we're going to probably pay for that, unfortunately, as we get into June and July, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. Otherwise, it's been super wet here over the western Gulf states up to Missouri and Arkansas. I've been seeing videos of flash flooding. Unfortunately, that pattern is not going to change anytime over the next few days. We're going to have to get into next Tuesday and Wednesday to see the rainy pattern change, and then it gets hot on the Gulf Coast. And we are going to see all of this rain that's affecting the south central U.S. eventually spreading north and eastward, and a more unsettled pattern starting this weekend in the mid-Atlantic, in the Ohio Valley, the mid-Ohio Valley, and the Great Lakes, and continuing into next week. It looks like a pretty wet week. Now, over the eastern Atlantic, you see all of this red on the water vapor. This indicates stable air. Air masses that are certainly not going to be the kind that produce tropical activity. They're going to cause anything that does come off the African coast here to basically fade. And I think that pattern continues here over the next few weeks. And I'm actually going to walk you guys through why that is. Here is a look as well at the visible and infrared. This is from Alex Borum's website, cyclonicwx.com. And what you'll see here over the eastern Atlantic, let me find my pen for you guys again here, is an area that is very stable. Some Saharan dust coming off of the northern African coast. Kind of see this yellow in here. That creates sinking air, which is detrimental to seeing thunderstorms and tropical wave activity. And that is very common this time of the year. And we're going to see periods of the tropical season where the water is going to continue to warm, but we're going to go through phases where the Saharan air basically kills off any thunderstorm activity. We're not going to have 500 waves coming off of Africa every day or two, and each one of those becomes a storm. We're going to have periods where it'll be more active than not, but also periods where we'll have Saharan air. That happens every year, by the way. Nothing unique to this season coming up. Over the rest of the Atlantic, though, you can see definitely lots of shower and thunderstorm activity extending from just east of Jamaica through Hispaniola, Puerto Rico, Virgin Islands, southeastern Bahamas, right on up to the south of Bermuda. And you can see the motion of the storms indicates southwest flow aloft. That, of course, is not favorable for thunderstorm development. As any waves come across, they hit that southwest flow, and it just takes the tops of them and shoots it off to the north and east. So does something weak survive under something like that? I think certainly so, but it's going to be a little bit of time before that occurs. The Gulf is quiet. The Western Caribbean is quiet. I don't think it's going to stay that way, but that's where we're at right now. Here's another look at the Eastern Atlantic. You can see kind of that yellowy haze where we have that Saharan air. So very stable right now, which is great. But again, don't think we stay that way. Here's a look at La Nina and El Nino. Now, the zero line indicates neutral conditions in the tropical Pacific. The trend has been from the El Nino conditions, where we had over 1 degree Celsius above average anomaly, has dropped off significantly beginning in early April. This has been predicted well. It has dropped off to just below 0.4 degrees above the average. So we're heading into a neutral phase. The forecast models that I've been looking at, that everybody's been looking at, this is from University of Columbia, show that the trend is going to continue downhill, where we're going to be pretty much in a neutral spot here by June. And then as we head later into the summer, La Nina conditions take over. Now, the strength of the La Nina, obviously, the farther you go out in time, the less certainty we're going to have on that. But what La Nina does is it basically takes the most active tropical activity that's been in the Pacific side of things and shifts it to the Atlantic. Because with the La Nina, we've got less wind shear on the Atlantic side. The water circulation kind of changes, where storms are more likely to gather strength and become more of a threat to the United States. But a lot of that is going to depend too on where our high pressure system aloft sets up. Here's a look at global surface anomalies. Let me make this a little bit bigger for you guys to see. And you can see certainly that La Nina beginning to take over here in the eastern part of the tropical Pacific. This area was in warm colors this time last year. It has now gone to cooler colors. And what that means is cooler waters are being upwelled from below the ocean surface up to the surface now. That is a a normal response coming out of a strong El Nino. But we're seeing that take over continuing and continuing. And there's some warmth close to Ecuador and Colombia that I think eventually goes away, but we're not going to be there just yet. The general trend is going to be later in the summer, where a lot of this area is going to be in the blue, and we'll continue to see a lot of red across this area. So basically, we continue. You know what? I said those colors backwards. What I meant to say was this area in here is going to cool, and this area is going to warm. I need another cup of coffee. All right, I'm not editing that out. We're all human here. We all make mistakes. So we're going to have to just move on and get on with our day here. Here's a look at the Atlantic. And again, the story this spring has been much above average water temperatures. They were much above average last year. They're going to be this year. They probably will be next year as well, as we're in a longer term period of warmer than average waters caused by geothermal activity and other things that we just can't control, in my opinion. But as you see right here, obviously the main development region, the Caribbean and the Gulf are all running hot for this time of the year. They've been doing that all year long. And I don't think we see that change anytime this summer. Now the rate of warming may actually start to come down as we're shifting to La Nina. But nonetheless, bodies of water just don't flip overnight. It takes months and years to get everything to kind of flip. So this season we are loaded up for very warm waters, which will of course bring us more storm fuel and more content for storms once wind shear is low to very quickly intensify. Rapid intensification is a word we've heard a lot, and that's happened recently in El Nino and La Nina. The difference being that La Nina, meaning there'll be a better opportunity for storms to have less wind shear to fight and strengthen more quickly, and generally take a track closer to land as well. Here's a look at our oceanic heat content. This is from University of Miami, Rosenthal School. And you can see this is a map we would typically see in July or early August. If you look at the amount of deep ocean warmth, it is already very high over the Western Caribbean and over to the east of the Windward Islands of South America. Still kind of cool over here in the deep tropics, but that should climb. And we're starting to see, obviously, over the Eastern Gulf, enough oceanic heat content where if something does form in here, it does have the fuel to strengthen. Here's a look at where we're sitting in the main development region. This is way out in the Atlantic where tropical waves form. And we've been pretty steady at about 1 degree Celsius above the average. These water temperatures don't cool off as quickly as closer to the Atlantic Ocean East Coast, but they are still very warm. They've been warm all year. If the conditions were right, we could have had something form in February or March, but that's very rare. We've actually never really seen that happen. Caribbean waters, 1 degree above average as well. Again, not a lot of change coming through there. And the Gulf has been running warm for several months now. We've had some dips and some ebbs, but we are heading back, or ebbs and flows. We are heading back in the direction, generally speaking, of warming with respect to average, as we're going to see a very warm week next week over the Gulf states. And I think that'll help our anomalies climb as well over the next couple of weeks. The Gulf is warm enough now, but this is with respect to average. It'll continue to be higher than average. Here's a look at where things have kind of changed and where we're kind of seeing that relative warmth, and obviously the cooling over the Pacific. But other areas we need to watch, the western part of the West Pacific Basin could be loaded up for some strong storms here. Japan, Philippines, Taiwan, China later this May into June, July, August. We see, with respect to the fact that everything's running pretty warm, it's not super, super warm here over Bermuda and over the Western Atlantic. And when you see a gradient like this, that generally starts to outline where storms form. Storms like this tend to form along boundaries between cooler and warmer. It's what's called a thermal front, even in the tropics. And so you can kind of see where the shape of the high pressure system is kind of settled in right now. You can kind of see that in here. Steering currents then you would think would take things in this direction, kind of around the periphery of those cooler waters, as higher than average Bermuda high sets up in here. And that's going to be the case that we need to be watching here, or the setup we need to be watching here as we head through the summer months. Here is the NMME climate model, and let me make this a bit smaller for you guys. This was last month, but these things don't change too much. And as we take a look here at May, we're obviously still running very warm, except near Bermuda and off the East Coast. As we get to June and July, the anomalies aren't going anywhere. They're pretty much set in here according to this model for August, September, Again, let me make this a little bit smaller. October, November. So the longer term climate models say there's not really anything major that's going to drop us down below average. We're still going to have above average storm fuel in place based on the climatological average. And the period of climatological record here is maybe 100, 150 years. It's just not even a fraction of how old the Earth is. So again, we just don't have records that go back thousands of years to tell us what's actually happened. But since we've been studying these over the last couple hundred years or so, we're obviously in a hot spot. Here's a look at upper level highs and lows. The cooler colors indicate troughing. The warmer colors indicate ridging. And you can see right now, pretty good ridge across the eastern United States. That's going to build in over the Gulf of Mexico, meaning we're not going to see any action in the Gulf next week. It's going to warm the Gulf up. We're going to see above average temperatures across the south and the southeast, with cooler than average weather next week over the Great Lakes. Also in between, probably some very active weather. You see this dip here. This will continue to mean instability in place. Very just disturbed weather here over the eastern Caribbean into the central Atlantic. High pressure over the eastern Atlantic, meaning no action expected here, and that actually is going to build in. But as we get into the middle of May, we see the ridge kind of building back to the west over Texas and Mexico, troughing over the northeast, meaning unsettled weather heading to about May 20th in the northeast. As we go beyond that, that trough starts to lift out and high pressure aloft builds in. As our waters continue warming up and we see this high building in, we start to see the framework for what's going to be a more active potential tropical season. See, you've got these low heights that are going away and the ridge builds in. Then we've got to watch things coming in underneath. And the areas that I think we're going to be having to watch are the Southern Gulf and the Western Caribbean underneath the ridge. I've heard other forecasters call this the ridge over troubled water. Apologies to Simon and Garfunkel here. But as we head into June, that ridge continues to build. This is not uncommon, by the way. But because waters are already warm and we're already on a positive anomaly, meaning we're already warmer than average, heights are stronger than average, we're going to see a few things because of this. Number one, we are going to see a hot start to summer here over the breadbasket of the country here, over the heartland. Number two, we're going to see active weather over the top of that ridge. So could be very active in June over the Great Lakes, Midwest, parts of the Mid-Atlantic and Northeast with severe weather. And number three, the waters continue to warm in the Gulf. And if conditions are just right, in between these two areas of high pressure in here, we've got an avenue for storms to form. So that's what I'll be watching for you guys here. Here's a look at temperature anomalies. This is not ocean water, this is air temperature. And you can see very warm over the southeast and over Texas and the Gulf here next week. Triple digit heat over Texas, well into the 90s across the deep south here next week as pools are opening, as they should be. But that's going to warm up the waters. Then we go through a cooler phase overall as we get into the following week, the week of May 13th. Beyond that, we start to warm right back up as high pressure builds in. And as we head into June, things are going to heat up pretty quickly here. I think we'll see these anomalies spreading north and east well before the 4th of July. So that certainly favors more tropical activity. Here's a look at surface pressures. Again, don't get too caught up in this. Unsettled weather here, active severe weather season continues for a couple weeks. Then we see higher than average pressures building into the central US. We see higher than average pressures here over the central Atlantic. As we go into the end of May, before Memorial Day, you can start to see here the European says, we've got a little bit of an avenue here for pressures to lower. And when that happens, you get convergence near all these land masses of Central America. We've got the warmer waters in place. All we really need to see is a reduction in wind shear, and we'll start to get storms to form across this area. And you can kind of see that starting to take place. And then you see by Memorial Day and the following week, the very end of May, pressures are already running below average. So pretty good agreement here in all the ensembles that pressures will be low over the northwestern Caribbean and the southeastern Gulf. This means absolutely nothing as to where storms going to form and hit, but it certainly gives us some clues as to where things can get going. Here's one other feature one other map I want to show you guys. This is going to be very technical, but I'll walk you through it here real fast. This is upper level divergence and lifting and convergence. The darker colors in brown indicate convergence aloft, which kills thunderstorms. The green colors indicate divergence. That's favorable ventilation for storms to form. Right now, we're in a very kind of a negative situation for storms to form. We've got a lot of convergence here, meaning storms are going to spread and not form. You can see a little bit of convergence here, but not very favorable around Puerto Rico. And then the Eastern Atlantic is certainly shut down for the time being. What we want to see are greens for storms to form. Next week, we start to see a little bit better convergence here over the deep tropics, but kind of close to the equator. So I wouldn't be too concerned about that. But as we head into the middle of May, we start to see a little bit more favorable action here, potentially over the intertropical convergence zone. It's not great, but it's better. As we run into beyond May 20th, we start to see some shifting coming, and by Memorial Day, a lot more green showing up and a lot less brown, which means things are starting to get going. And then the Caribbean looks pretty hot here early on in June for activity. In fact, the entire tropics look very favorable for activity. This doesn't mean we're going to have 5 named storms coming off of Africa and going straight into the Gulf, storm after storm after storm, like we could see in August. But it does mean probabilities are going to be much higher than what you would typically expect in June for tropical activity. So I'm going to keep monitoring this model for you guys, but overall things get a lot more favorable as we get towards Memorial Day and beyond. And it's possible something forms even before then. GFS operational, again, you can see not a lot going in the tropics. We've got some spinach here over our tropical gyre, but it's on the Pacific side of Panama through next week. Beyond that, though, we have to keep an eye on things here. We've got a front that'll drop down. Sometimes decaying cold fronts can lead to some action, but you can see very strong flow aloft is probably going to prevent anything from forming. But you can see some convergence over the Western Caribbean that we need to keep an eye on. There's nothing coming off of Africa yet that really needs to be watched, but I think that is going to change after the 20th of May. Here's the expected satellite, and you can kind of see, generally speaking, that fast flow out of the southwest, strong wind shear, not going to form anything. But as we go into time here after the 10th, quiet for now, but we should see a buildup of storms by the 15th to 20th of May. Precipitable water, very wet here, Puerto Rico, Northern Islands, Hispaniola, lots of moisture in place, definitely getting an early start to rainy season here. That could let up a little bit, but we've got another front that's going to drop down below our ridge here later next week, and you can see things start ramping right back up over the Caribbean. And then finally, I kind of showed you guys already the upper level forecast, but again, to see action in the tropics, we need to see green. Right now, we're not in that favorable spot. We won't be next week or the following week either. By the 17th of May, you can start to see that we're in a little bit better spot to see some tropical activity according to this forecast. And then by the 22nd and 27th of May, a lot of the main development region and the Caribbean could be open season, and we may see a couple of storms forming by the beginning of June. So this is not uncommon, but because waters are warm already, we are probably going to see a little bit more lasting activity than what you might expect in this kind of a normal pattern. So this is not unusual, but very much as Kelvin waves come across here, we're going to see more action. Here's a quick look at precipitation forecasts. You can see June looks very wet again over the Caribbean. May's been wet, but June, that wetness spreads. As we head into the month of July, the Gulf looks like it's going to be a lot wetter, the Eastern Pacific as well. And take a look at this. The model is continuing to show multiple storm threats coming off of Africa right on into the Caribbean. And you can kind of see where things are expected to kind of go. Eastern, Central Gulf, East Coast potentially for July, August, September. And then finally in October, we may see things quieting down everywhere except across Florida. Caribbean could be super active in October, by the way. And even into November and December. It was wet down there, by the way, this time last year, but we had stronger wind shear in the El Nino. This year, as we go to a La Nina, the wind shear is lesser. So what does form down there has got a lot better chance of spinning into something. Here's a look at the extended forecast from the European model, and you can see as we get to about the 20th of May, it starts getting very wet here off of Africa. The Northwest Caribbean remains dry, but here comes our gyre, which will get going here around Memorial Day, and overall the week leading up to the beginning of June could be very wet in the Western Caribbean. Some of that could come up into the Gulf or into the Bahamas as well. So yeah, we're getting off to a very active start. Severe weather, tornadoes, It wasn't super active for a couple months, but April was very busy, our second busiest month, and we're now sitting around the average or slightly above average. So April was a catch-up month, unfortunately at the expense of many here in the plains and parts of the Midwest. The Southeast was not super busy, but now you can see the red line is this year we have jumped above the average. We're not anywhere close to the record, which was 2011, which was extreme. But a lot of that can be attributed to this transition out of La Nina into El Nino, meaning stronger jet stream position over the Rockies, bringing more moisture northward. And it's going to continue this upcoming week. We're going to see some pretty active weather. Yes, we had the second most tornadoes on record for April, but we weren't even close to half of what 2011 was. That was an insane year. Many of you remember across the South and across the plains. That was a year of Tuscaloosa. That was the year of Raleigh. That was the year of Joplin, Missouri, all getting hit by strong tornadoes. But we are going to see severe weather here today. Mainly a hail threat, flood threat, severe weather threat over West Texas. Also a threat up into Nebraska and western Kansas. Tomorrow, we see that shifting east. There could be an upgrade coming to slight risk depending on how things play out. West Texas again stays busy. As we get to Sunday, right now it's a marginal risk, still an upgrade possible. More storms coming in the areas that just don't need it right now, Arkansas, Oklahoma, Texas, and Louisiana. And then unfortunately next week we may see a pretty big outbreak of tornadoes again for Monday. Kansas, Nebraska, Oklahoma, and maybe even spreading Monday night farther east into Iowa, Missouri, and Oklahoma. Tuesday that continues, by the way, into the Mississippi Valley, up into the Chicago area, Indiana. And we may see a 30% somewhere in here. It's a little early to make that call. Wednesday, we could see this area expand some. I think parts of the Mid-Atlantic, Ohio Valley, and Northeast will have some severe weather Wednesday and Thursday next week. But right now, it's not being predicted just yet. There's too much uncertainty. But here's a look at things real quick. Big storm moving into the west. We're going to see snow over the ski areas. Are going to get lots of snow here this weekend. Late season storm. But here comes the action down south. We'll see showers and storms generally from New England all the way down to Texas here this weekend. Maybe parts of Florida see some heavier storms. But next week, this is where we need to be watching. Strong low pressure moving up into the Dakotas. Active weather, tornadoes potentially in areas that just got hit last week. As this spreads eastward, the storm kind of shears out, but we see pieces of it. And then the next piece of energy swings out into the central part of the country. And Wednesday and Thursday could be pretty active. We may even see a bit of a derecho or at least a convective system with more widespread severe weather across this part of the country. I hope you can see my mouse, and I apologize if you can't, but we may have some severe weather all the way down to North Carolina, Tennessee, and Arkansas for the second part of next week, and then across the rest of the Southeast later next week before it turns cooler next weekend, and unfortunately maybe wet again for many of us here across the eastern United States. But nicer weather should start the following week. Quick look here at our severe potential. GFS model shows lots of storm fuel in place here this weekend down south. It's going to grow on Monday, though. Take a look at this. Monday evening, we see quite a bit of potential for severe weather up into eastern parts of Nebraska, northwestern Missouri, western Iowa, maybe even South Dakota, coming around 6, 7 o'clock on Monday. You can see this area is going to advance north and east over the Ohio River states here on Tuesday night. As we get to Wednesday, the Mid-Atlantic, the Carolinas, Virginia, and then eventually the Deep South Thursday into Friday could see more severe weather. I'll have more on that next week, but I really appreciate y'all's time. I know I got into detail. I let a few things slip, but we're all human here. I don't do a 3-minute spiel with a bunch of makeup on and mics and cameras all over me. This is just me in my home office as a meteorologist doing my very best to make sure you guys are starting to prepare for severe weather. And I know other folks on YouTube say it, no reason to be scared, just prepare. And that's very much true, but we all need to do a better job of preparing. A life saved is very much valuable. You mean a lot. You mean a lot to me, but more importantly, you mean a lot to God. And I do this because I'm here to glorify God and to share the good news that He has given us. Everybody matters. There was a time in my life where I felt like I had to please everybody and that I fell short of everybody's expectations. But it took a lot of seeking, but I was able to accept Jesus Christ as my Savior in 2013. Up until then, my worth was in how much I failed other people, in my opinion. I was very hard on myself. I was not exceeding expectations. The good news is that the battles that you are fighting, the battles that I am fighting, do not need to be fought alone. With God, He can fight the battles for you. And I wanted to share that good news with you because He has made a huge difference in my life. From before, when I struggled with trying to meet everybody's expectations, to now when, yes, I slip up, but I can go to God in prayer and ask Him to not only forgive me, but to help me fight the battles that I fight. And I know a lot of you have come to me with prayer requests, and I do pray for you, and I have others preparing for you. But my one prayer today is that if you're in a spot in your life where you feel stuck, you feel there's a lot of divide, you feel that you're never going to be able to win a battle, I just ask you to sit down, take a look at things, and to be where I was several years ago and say, maybe there's just something better out there for me. Maybe I can be redeemed. Maybe I can have all these burdens lifted off of me, and maybe I can live eternally with Jesus Christ our Savior. Romans 10:9, Paul tells the church of Rome that if thou shalt confess with thy mouth the Lord Jesus, and shalt believe in thine heart that God hath raised him from the dead, thou shalt be saved. No weather forecast is going to save you. No job is going to save you. No paycheck's going to save you. No family member is going to save you. But when your time on earth is gone, you've got a choice. And I hope you make that choice sooner than later because you don't know when that day is going to come. But being saved basically removes all the bloodshed, removes all the burden, removes all the struggle that you're going through so that you don't have to worry about the forecast in heaven because it's looking great. So I'm here to pray for you no matter what you're going through today, and I really appreciate you joining me today. We'll catch up again here next week. God bless you.